Says it's recording live now.
Yep, it says it's streaming.
Okay, well, we're hoping that you're having, no? Yes? Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, hopefully for all, or at least in part, and that you're enjoying and gaining from what we have to say. We're excited here that there are people from Queensland, South Australia, all over New South Wales. Great opportunity because people who mightn't have been able and probably wouldn't have been able to be on site today are joining us. So now is our live question and answer, and we have with us Madeline Kratz, Kelly Leese, Mark Page. We've got Leonie and Adrian as well, so we can hopefully answer the questions that you've sent in. We have a bit of time to do that. So I'm going to throw first, let me see, it's not a dartboard. I'll throw first to Adrian. Thank you. And Adrian, there's a question here, and it's in particular related to how much does a nuke cost and how long can I have it in the box traveling?
Oh, that's a good question, Kevin. My nukes generally start from about $230 for a 5-frame nuke. And we have people come as far as 12 hours or more to pick up Nucleus hives from us. But they plan their trip quite well. And usually last year we had people from Brewarrina who travelled 12 hours and they stopped halfway and unloaded the bees and let them fly for the day. And they spent the day in town where they stopped and had a nice day out, and then loaded them again that afternoon and continued on their trip and got them home quite safely. Other times we've put nukes on pallets and packed them with dry ice and sent them up to Cairns on cold transport and things like that. So that's always a viable option as well if people want to buy quantities of nukes. But generally speaking, if you pick it up late in the afternoon, you've got 3 or 4 hours, no problems, to travel in a car and then open it up before the morning and let the bees settle in.
Great, thanks for that. Another one that I think is pretty important that's being asked is, what would you say the top 3 things are when buying a nuke? What should people look for?
The top 3 things when people are buying a Nucleus hive, obviously the queen that's going to be in the nuke is very, very important to know where she comes from and the temperament and the progeny that she's come from. And derived from, I should say. So the breeder that they're using to breed their queens or where they're getting their queens bred. Secondly, obviously the equipment. You want to buy brand new equipment, brand new frames or fairly brand new that have been drawn out in a hive specifically for that. And I'd say one of the most important things would also be the pest and disease aspect, to make sure that the beekeeper has some sort of barrier system and then they've been trained in pest and disease management and they're implementing that.
Great, thanks. Mark, I wonder if you want to jump in on some of that pest and disease and again, just emphasize some of the points you're looking for, not only in a nuke, but in your hive inspection.
Yeah, so October's our AFB awareness month, so inspecting your bees, looking for those dark sunken cells or perforated cells that may be signs of American foul brood. Your obligations as a beekeeper is to report to DPI if found. So American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood and Nosema. If you do a slide smear to send off to the lab for diagnostics, that also meets your obligations of reporting. So you don't have to ring again or do anything like that, but very important to be in that brood box and having a look.
Great, thank you. That Kelly, I'm going to throw to you for a second. Similar lines, but somebody's asked about AFB and poly hives in particular because of irradiation and things like that, and burning and recycling.
Okay, so in terms of irradiation, they can be irradiated numerous times, just like the timber hives, so there's no concerns there. The plastic parts that are on the poly hives can discolour, but they don't become particularly brittle, so they can be irradiated a number of times. I definitely wouldn't burn them. In terms of recycling, you can visit a website called Expanded Polystyrene Australia, and they have a range of locations around Australia in all states where you can post or drop off polystyrene. Having said that, hives do have a long lifespan, and we don't know how long that is. As I said, they have been using them for 40 plus years in Europe, so it's likely that you won't have to replace them in your beekeeping lifetime.
Great, thanks for that. A couple of questions in particular with flow hives. Honey candying quickly is one, all right, particularly on canola, this person's speaking. But there's another one that I would say really needs addressing, and it's, I want to know which is best about putting another brood box or another super on flow hives to prevent swarming.
Yeah, look, you could do either add a second brood box or add a super. However, you do have to consider if you add a brood box, you are potentially doubling the size of that colony. So they can actually be a bit more difficult to manage. I would recommend that perhaps an extra super would be the better way to go, giving them that extra bee space, and then you can be removing honey from the flow super so they still feel like they have something to do in the hive. In terms of the candying honey in the frames, that is a tricky one. I would say that the best way to get that candied honey out would be to take those flow frames off the hive and put them in a warm room or somewhere warm before you extract them. So it's a bit tricky with the candied honey, and in colder climates that can be a problem.
Okay, I hope we are reaching people and answering the questions for you. So, and please be aware that anyone and everyone who's speaking today has offered that if you have other questions or you don't feel it was answered sufficiently, you will receive email addresses and the like. And let me see, I'll give you Bianca's personal phone number so you can bother her any time of the day or night with how to get in touch with us, because we just so appreciate Bianca. All right, so Leonie, what's your private phone? No, sorry. Leonie, is there I'm gonna ask the million-dollar question, is there a Bert program in Queensland?
Not as far as I know. Victoria initiated it with Daniel Martin with their squirt program, and we've sort of taken a lot of the information from that, but it's been designed so that we can work with other states to try and get a uniform approach to emergency management in bees across the country. So it's something we'd be more than happy to talk to Queensland about, certainly in the future.
Thanks for that. And a question is, the Bert course that you're offering, is there a cost for that?
The initial project is for us to invite or try and train up about 50 beekeepers and industry people initially as part of that project. The people that are included in part of that project, there is actually no cost fee for the initial 50. And then after that, we'd have to be in talks with Tocal about how that program would roll out.
Mm-hmm. And of that 50 people, have all of those people completed?
No, look, we haven't actually started the course yet. We've had our pilot program of the online component, and we've still got to run our pilot of the one-day workshop. And once that's completed and we're happy with it, we'll then be rolling it out to inviting clubs and people and beekeepers to participate in that program.
Excellent. And may we never really need it. No offense, sorry. I mean, great work, great everything, but you know, the reason, scary. Yeah. Okay, another question is the Bert training for DPI employees? Are you suggesting that beekeepers who undertake this training would be seconded to the DPI in case of an emergency?
Part of the reason of creating this training is that we do have a database or a ton of trained professional accredited people out there who can assist DPI in an emergency. So they probably would be seconded to DPI in the case of an emergency. And part of completing that course is they would sign to say that they agree to be called upon in the case of an emergency. And that's why they would be trained to do so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're ever hopeful, and hopefully all beekeepers are being ever vigilant. I just see Madeline there, and she's chomping at the bit to answer a couple of questions. So one of them that we have is, how do I know when to start and stop feeding bees?
Yes, that's a very important question, and what you need to consider is why you're feeding. So if, for example, you want to maintain your colonies, you're building your colonies for crop pollination, then you might want to feed them either sugar or pollen if one or the other is short. But if specifically you're going into autumn, the honeybees naturally they close down, or they prepare themselves for winter, if you like, so the brood reduces naturally. And in that scenario, you don't want to be building up your colonies just before going into winter, because otherwise it's likely that they might actually starve throughout winter or spring if they don't have enough storage, or if you're not feeding bees enough. So it's really important to consider what time of the season it is, and why you're feeding. Is it to maintain the bees? Are you trying to grow the colonies? And yeah, which time of the year are you doing that?
Thank you. Another one for Leonie, thanks. How can I be part of emergency response? Not me, I'm doing the course.
No, you're welcome, Kevin, anytime. Yeah, no, look, if my work email is going up at the end of this, they're more than welcome to contact me, and I can put them on the list of people to contact, or they can get in touch with Mark. Yeah, and just put their name down, and they can be on the list of people who we can contact and invite to participate. That's fine.
Excellent, thank you. And Dave, you've been sitting there patiently. Thank you so much. Dave from the Hunter Valley Amateur Beekeepers Association. Do you have a membership program where we can have access to an experienced beekeeper? What does that mean, experienced beekeeper?
Yeah, we've got over 300 members in our club, Kevin. So sort of a lot of times, you know, sort of new members will be mentored by an experienced beekeeper in that area. You know, we also run, you know, training courses at the Heather Bray Botanic Gardens, and we have extraction done. So there's plenty of experience from joining a bee.
Okay, and there's another question about how much does it cost me to be a member of the Bee Club?
To join the Hunter Valley Amateur Beekeepers, it's $15, and then there's another $20 joining fee for the affiliation of the New South Wales ABA, and that also covers your insurance as well.
Great.
So
good value.
Yeah, it is.
Excellent. And are there morning teas and things?
Sorry?
Do you have morning teas and lunches and things?
Yeah, well, what's happened now, we've actually changed our meeting venue. The Botanic Gardens, we sort of outgrew the facilities there. So we've had one meeting at the Hexham Bowling Club, you know, so there's, you know, there's food and coffee before or after, you know, so it's reasonably social as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Adrian,
Yes.
don't want to keep you too long from your beekeeping, mate. I can see you getting edgy, my friend. The question was, are nucleus colonies available all the time?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. Generally speaking, see, it depends on how you make the nukes up. If you're going to make them up the way I make them up, so I really have a late start to the season because I'm starting them out on foundation. So the beginning of spring is when my bees start to draw make the colonies up.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my customers are happy to wait. If you're using old combs and things like that, then people may make them up really early in the season, and the same thing towards the end of the season. So generally speaking, we would stop selling nukes around about but it really depends on the season and what's happening in the season. We have years where we have rainfall in certain areas, and I have customers ring me from those areas where there might be narrow leaf ironbark, and I know that the bees are going to continue to build over the winter period and collect honey. And other times, say like Victoria, for example, you wouldn't be sending nukes to Victoria in January, February, because they probably wouldn't get enough of them to swim and get them built up for winter. So it really just varies on the season and where the bees are going to go, and probably the experience of the beekeeper as well. Some beekeepers are very experienced and they can have nucleus colonies. And other beekeepers that just want a nuke to put into a beehive to start out probably wouldn't want to try to do that.
Yep, fair enough. Yes, and yeah, that's what we say. Simple but not easy.
Does that sort of answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you. A question for any and everyone, all right? Because from my perspective, there's a lot of issues around old dark comb, all right? So how about, there's got to be something pretty well everyone can say about this. And Kelly in particular, people were saying, what do I do about those in Warre hives and the top bar, et cetera, et cetera. And so can we have some feedback on old comb?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously with your Warre and top bar systems, you're crushing comb. So in terms of managing that older comb, it's actually less of an issue than it can be in Langstroth hives, because when you're lifting up the boxes on a Warre hive, for instance, you're putting new frames below, the bees move down, the brood box moves down, they go up into the older comb and backfill it with honey, and then you can crush that and melt it down. So it's not going back into the hive in that manner. Obviously with the Langstroth hive, you are hopefully replacing 2 to 3 frames out of your brood box every year and lifting those up, or in some other manner discarding them so that you're getting new foundation down in those brood boxes. Similarly with the top bar hive, the bees are moving along, the brood nest is constantly moving, so you're generally crushing that wax, so it's not a huge problem with those 2 hive types.
Mark, from a pest and disease type of angle, do you have anything you can contribute? Well, I'm sure you do have something you can contribute to the thought of rotating out old comb.
Yeah, so we do say that the old comb does have the possibility of carrying pathogens of disease. So rotating those frames out, often in a brood box certain times a year, the outside frames will be honey. So we could remove those, giving us the space to get some new foundation frames in, shuffling things along. But that's the biggest part. I mean, in the old school of beekeeping, the Queen loves those dark brood frames, but we've got plenty of evidence of freshly drawn foundation with the Queen absolutely laying the frame right out. So we know that's just a myth now. So yes, try and get some new comb into there. Better for your bee health.
Okay, thank you. Better for the bee health, and that's why we're here. We're not just here today for beekeepers, but we're also here for the betterment of our bees, aren't we? And if we're each looking after our own bees well, we're looking after each other's, and that's a real positive thing. So again, thank you for being here today. Let's see, Madeline, there's another question for you, and I'm going to come to Bianca shortly because you're sitting there so patiently, and I'm gonna ask you to talk a little bit, the questions around how do I sign up? How do I do a course? Where do I go? What's that process? Okay, but Madeline, first,
Yes.
Why only white sugar?
Yes, so there's a few advantages of feeding sugar. First, white sugar. First, because there are sugars that are toxic to honeybees. And for example, molasses, which is the byproduct of sugar production, is unsuitable to feed to bees. And there's a whole other range that you don't want to feed to bees because they are toxic. And the advantage of actually feeding white sugar, the standard table sugar, is because it's also your cheapest option. And definitely not feed honey, as Mark would confirm, it's another biosecurity risk. So feeding white table sugar is really the best way to go.
Thank you. And just on that feeding honey, you're not to feed honey to birds. I'm sorry, that's for anybody out there. I knew a fellow who sold honey at a market stall. We called it a bird feeding grade honey. And we did have a talk with him. But just for anybody who's out there, thank you. That's not opinion, that's fact, all right? Thanks, Bianca.
I'm just not sure of your question.
Oh, the question is, I want to do a course at TOCAL. What do
Okay.
I do?
Okay, so the first point of call would be to search TOCAL education website and have a look under courses and click on bees. So you'll be able to see where you can access application forms for our Certificate 3 in beekeeping, aimed at providing skills and trade qualifications to people in the industry. And also all of our short courses, which are aligned to the same units of competency in the Cert 3. Our short courses are designed to reach the audience that might not fit necessarily to a Cert 3 or maybe don't have their own bees at the moment or are looking into bees further. So we have Beginning in Bees is a starting point. We have a Honeybee Biosecurity course, which is aligned to the Cert 3 and meets the ARBIC Code of Practice requirements for biosecurity training for all registered beekeepers. We have a Spring Management course, fantastic for people who've done a few seasons of beekeeping. And we've also got a Requeen Bees short course, which is another great course to quantify all of your existing knowledge in bees for maybe someone who's had bees for a little bit longer, maybe 2 to 3 seasons. Requeen Bees is another fantastic short course, all available on our TOCAL College education website.
Thanks, Bianca. Kelly, as education officer, can you comment about what if somebody, I mean, Bianca touched on it, but somebody who says, I want to do a Cert 3, all right, but they don't really have that kind of experience. Can you say about a starting point for them? Is it, no, I'm trying to say, not worth doing the course, because obviously it's worth doing any course, but do I get credit transfer? What about RPLs, things like that?
Yeah, so we have a few different options for people if they're wanting to do the Certificate 3. So if you've got some prior experience with beekeeping, we have some credit transfer options. So if you've done courses with TOCAL before, all those units in another place, and you have a certificate, you can get credit transfer for some units in the Certificate 3. If you've got industry experience, we do offer recognition of prior learning, or RPL. So you submit evidence and that can support you gaining that unit without having to go through some of the other things that students that just enroll in Certificate 3 have to do. In terms of coming to do it, if you're a new beekeeper, it's good to have a little bit of experience under your belt. It's a tricky thing to do if you don't actually have bees to start a Certificate 3, because obviously you need a little bit of knowledge around beekeeping. So having at least a couple of hives for a year or more is a good starting point with the Cert 3. And it's an option to come and do some short courses, get some bees, come and do Beginning in Bees, as Bianca mentioned, get a little bit of experience under your belt. And obviously those units count towards the Certificate 3. So there's no reason you can't start in a short course and then use those units as part of competency for the Certificate 3 going forward if you get really into it, which most people who start keeping bees end up being pretty obsessed.
Great, thanks, Kelly. I think that's quite helpful for folk who go, oh, I don't want to commit to a Cert 3, but I may later on. There's no reason to not start. Leonie, can I come to you? Thank you. And is there some kind of qualification that goes with the Bert training, or is it aligned to anything?
It's aligned to an accredited unit of competence, which I've just reposted on the chat for people that may have missed it. It's AHC BER 301, work effectively in an emergency disease or plant pest response. And it's the same thing as Kelly was saying. It can actually, because it's an accredited unit, it can actually go towards that Certificate 3 down the track as well. And that's why we've made it accredited.
Thank you for that. Mr. Page, welcome back. Okay.
Thanks, Kevin.
Can you talk a little bit about how a person notifies about pests and diseases, which ones are notifiable, and what the process is? Because wasn't it that you used to send to the lab, and then that was as good as reporting, but that's changed perhaps?
Yeah, so for beekeeping, you may gain the experience that you can field recognise AFB and know what to do with it, following the guidelines with the code of practice now. So you can also ring up. There's a phone number. I can't rattle it off the top of my head. You can online report if you can recognise the diseases. So American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood or nosema. If you do a slide smear that you send into the lab, that also meets your obligation of reporting. So you don't have to report again.
Oh, it does. Oh, okay. So if you send a slide to the lab, that's still like notifying.
If it comes in as a positive, your obligations are met there of reporting. You don't have to, once you get your positive result back, you don't have to ring again. It's already been logged for you. Great, thank you. Okay, Madeline, just while we've got you, because I know you're very busy, where was that question? I better have a look. I've got one. I'll go first. Sorry to Dave. Dave, if you could. Somebody's asking. Sorry about that, Madeline. Somebody was asking, can I go to the bee club even if I don't know anything? Can I go to the bee club even if I don't know anything to just find out a bit more without having to join or have bees?
Yeah, that's fine, Kevin. Yeah, because when we start a meeting, we always ask if there's any new people in the room, any new beekeepers or anyone who wants to learn about beekeeping. So yeah, they're more than welcome.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone who's joined us today about more than just bees, and I would encourage you very much to hang through right to the end of the day, everyone, and tell people, because Fiona Chambers talk about the Ween Bee Foundation and what they do means you don't actually have to have bees to be involved in bees. Okay, so I'd encourage you to stay for that. I'll also say at this moment that Dr. Jamie Ellis is unable to be with us to answer questions, but again, he has invited anyone with any questions to email him. He's quite a friendly guy, and he's happy to answer those questions. Likewise, we're hoping that Claire and Martin will join us, and because we're in 2-dimension, there won't be any pheromonal exchanges, but we're hoping that they're able to join us, but it's going to be like 4 o'clock in the morning for something like that for them. Madeline, I found it. All right, and it's about.
I'm ready.
I thought you might be. I get fair notice. It is with reference to pollen supplements and feeding of pollen supplement. How do I know which one?
Yes, so at the moment there's quite a few out there on the market, and it's always tricky to actually compare them as such, because depending on what they're based on, so how they've been made up. So some, for example, are soy-based, others might have some other vegetable flowers included and other ingredients. So quite often we don't actually even know the ingredients that have been used to make a supplement. So what's out there at the moment is the best that we do have, because there's still some limitations around supplementary feeding and knowing the exact requirements of honeybees and how long we can sustain honeybees on supplements. So to really be able to compare or give any comparison of different feeds, you would really have to test them, but this could still vary depending on which area you're in or what else might be flowering in your area. So it's without really analyzing a supplement. And even I think the classic one is always in terms of proteins. So some supplements have different ratings of how much protein is a supplement, but really, again, you cannot really compare a 37% with 40% with 45%, for example, because it could be based on different ingredients. And unless you analyze the ingredients and know how well the bees can digest those ingredients and the nutrition that they get from those, you cannot really compare them as such. So I think that's what I can say on supplements and choosing a supplement. So unfortunately, I can't be any more specific than that.
That's all
But
right.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. And just on that, because we have people from all different areas with us today, are trees the same? By that I mean, all right, so we've got a spotted gum here, but then there's a spotted gum somewhere else. Can we say, yes, it's going to be the same value in that nectar or pollen source?
Yeah, so they will be similar because in general, there's a really large range of, for example, proteins across different species. Within species, they will be more similar, but depending on what area you are in, so for example, the soil type might be different, which could slightly alter the nutrition that comes from nectar or pollen. So there could be some variation even within species, depending on what area you're in.
Great. Another one, Kelly, about packing down a flow hive in colder weather. What kind of recommendations or advice could you give there? Thank you.
So I don't live in a cold climate, so I haven't had to face this issue. However, if I was to think off the top of my head, ideally about what I would do in a cold climate, probably what I would recommend is actually removing the flow super, so that you're not getting issues with candied honey, perhaps if they're mainly clustering in the brood box. Like winter management in any location, if it's particularly cold, you might be packing those bees down just into the brood box anyway. If you are running an additional super, I'd suggest that you just run a small one like an Ideal or something like that. But yeah, to avoid the candying in the frames, perhaps remove the flow super. Yeah.
Okay, I hope that's being found to be helpful by those in places that are cold. Why are you living there if you're in the cold? But that's your choice, I guess. Sorry, it's the Gold Coast boy coming out of me. Adrian, why do you do Italian queens and not Caucasian or Carniolan?
That's a good question, Kevin.
Thank you. I love asking good questions.
It's a lot easier to focus on one subspecies of bees rather than trying to breed several types, and then you've got several different drones flying around to try to deal with and keep things pure. I just find Italians are quite hardy for the climate where I work my bees in New South Wales, but not saying there's anything wrong with any of the other subspecies. They're all have their pros and cons. It just comes down to personal preference and what's most suited for your climate and what you want to do as a beekeeper. For me, if I was running all Carniolan stock, then I'd find it really hard to keep them in the boxes in the beginning of spring, not having a lot of staff and things like that. Whereas somebody that is right on the spring management that can deal with the fast build-up of a good Carniolan race might actually benefit from having that because they can expand and make up more beehives quite quickly. They might be better for pollination contracts at certain times of the year where they can really get the bees to build very fast. But it really just depends. They do overwinter well, and the Italians seem to consume a lot of food over winter, and they
talking about bees.
Yeah, and they tend to breed prolifically and swarm as well, so they just don't stop breeding like the Carniolans, or control their breeding a little bit better. But they all have their pros and cons. I just prefer Italians, and I like the colour of them, and I think they're a nice, gentle bee, and they're good to work with.
Great. Thanks for that. Am I getting in trouble the way I'm talking here? Because it's too late. Okay. That's the beauty of live streaming. Where will we go? I do have a couple more. Cold climate feeding. Madeline, what for sugar syrup or dry sugar, or what do I do there?
Yes, and in general, first thing I would say again is to consider why you're feeding. So are you trying to keep your bees alive? Are you trying to stimulate them or not? Least stimulating is feeding dry sugar. And if you are in a cold climate, you might actually want to consider feeding dry sugar, because if you feed sugar syrup and it's really cold, it might be quite hard for the bees to actually take up the syrup. So if for cold climates, perhaps feeding dry sugar would be the way to go.
Okay, any other comments from people on that? What you're finding in your area with bees? Don't all speak at once. No? Oh,
I
Mark.
think
thank you.
just one point there is, you know, cold climates is probably would be best to have a hive, like top of hive feeder rather, so you're not opening up the whole colony to add a syrup or a dry sugar in that cold time.
Great, thank you. And while we've got you, Mark,
Hello.
I've got a couple for you. But one is, how many hives can you have in one area?
Oh, that'll depend a lot about conditions, and that's one part of beekeeping that, you know, yes, we're a beekeeper, but we need to pay attention to the environment around us. What's flowering? Are the bees actually working it? We know that bees will head out for 5Ks or so to forage, but there needs to be something flowering and for them to be foraging on it. So observing your bees at the entrance is one way to see, you know, Madeline touched on there earlier in her thing, you know, what kind of pollen are they bringing in? Early morning's a good time to watch that. And we can also generally see if bees are full of nectar. So, you know, coming back with extended abdomens and all, you know, dropping short of the hive, not meeting the entrance. And the other way is to inspect. So yes, we do our mandatory brood inspections, but we can also open the hive up, have a look up in the honey super or in the flow hive, in the window, all of those things, and see what they are doing. Bees won't draw wax if there's nothing to put in it. So if they're not working foundation frames you've put in, you know, possibly there's not much going on. But, you know, generally, you know, a suburban backyard or high residential areas, the bees will do pretty well because of all those garden plantings. But if you're out in a rural or country area, you do need to pay a bit more attention to what's happening around you in that environment.
So Mark, while I've got you there, urban and suburban areas are really good for bees, I'm hearing you say. I mean, a good location for consistent food. So does that mean I can have 20 hives in my backyard?
No, generally not. I mean, you may be able to until someone puts in a complaint against you or something like that happens, and a compliance officer from DPI may visit, and that's probably one of the directives you're going to get is to reduce the number of hives. So large blocks, you know, you may be able to keep up to 4 to 6 hives, you know, a smaller backyard or townhouse backyard, maybe one. But it will all depend, you know, we do know of occasions where there's 30 hives in a backyard. If no one, you know, complains about that, they will still be there. But once that first complaint goes in, you'll get directives there.
Thank you. And with a small number of hives in the backyard, now I know you're a biosecurity officer and there's a difference between biosecurity and compliance. So I'm focusing on the code of practice here, okay?
Yep.
If a person has a small number of hives, say the 1 flow hive or the 2 top bar hives in their backyard, where do they line up in as far as the biosecurity code of practice goes?
So, you know, the thing is they still need to comply with the biosecurity code of practice, Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice. So number 1, you need to register whether you've got 1 hive or thousands. You still need to register. You still have your obligations there under that code for a beekeeper of 1 to 50 hives. So your inspections, your disease inspections, you know, not neglecting your bees, maintaining equipment, not allowing bees to rob anything or any exposed honeys or frames or stickies, all of those kind of things. So you still need to meet those requirements as a beekeeper.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so we're heading towards the end of this session. There is another question answer at the end of the day where we'll have other speakers sharing with us in answering your questions. But just as we wrap up, this is for everyone, not out there. I mean, because if you're out there watching, you know things like you have to register a hive now and those good, I don't want to say behaviors, but good practices, okay? There's so many benefits in being registered. We can't go through them all here, but for everyone, as a quick wrap up. We've got, I think, about 4 minutes. What's something that you would like to convey from your perspective? Okay, like about nukes, about clubs, about Bert. Okay, so if each one would just take a moment and say, this question wasn't asked, but this is what I'd like to answer if that question was. Do I make sense? No, please say yes. Okay, well, let's start with Adrian. Thanks, right? I got you smiling.
I guess when to transfer a nuke into a full-size hive might be a good question. Once the frames are all drawn out and they're filling that last frame up, or there's full of bees across all frames and you can't see down between any of the frames, transfer it across straight away, because nukes won't last as nukes for very long. They build quite quickly, and then they will sometimes not even make a swarm cell. They'll just go. They'll leave, and they'll just leave eggs there. And that's a critical time, is when you make your nukes up, don't make them up, 2 months before your customers want to pick them up, or you want to utilize them. Make them up straight away. And having nukes, they're quite hard to manage. They're not like a normal beehive where you can put a super on there and then another one and another one because you're busy and you don't have time because they're bringing honey. Nukes will plug up with honey, lay some eggs up, and then they'll just swarm out. So just think about how many nukes you want to make up and make sure you have time to manage them properly, and do everything right by biosecurity and also your neighbours and customers and things like that.
Thanks, Adrian. David, how about a pitch for joining a club?
I think it's a really good idea to join a local bee club for numerous reasons, because, everyone wants to learn, and it's a good forum to learn. So we have a part in our meeting, and it's all questions and answers, and there's no silly questions. There's all like-minded people there from a lot of different backgrounds, and so it's a good way to learn.
Great, thanks, Dave. Okay, Leonie, Bert, can we have children come along with us?
No, because they're possibly going to be employed by DPI, they probably need to be over 18 years of age. Yeah.
But anything else you want to do to pitch getting involved with the emergency response?
Yeah, look, I think one of the main reasons we did, and I'll use the cliche, biosecurity is a shared responsibility. So the more we can educate people about the importance of biosecurity, the importance of early reporting and detection, look out for anything unusual. And even if you think you may not, you may know what it is or may not report it. And so if we can train people to assist us to respond quicker and minimise the cost and impact to industry, then that's by far our most important aspect. Get out there and train people to be able to help us help them. That'd be wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you. No, I'm sorry, everyone else, but that's the thing about being live, isn't it? We're going to go back. We're going to go back to our other speakers. Hope people join in and ask your questions, that we try to answer them. But now when we go from here, please return to the Tocal College YouTube channel. All right, you need to go there and click refresh. So return to the Tocal College YouTube channel, click refresh, and enjoy parts 2 of both Jamie Ellis and the Buckfast team. We've got Rod Burke. There's lots still to be had in this afternoon. Enjoy. Thank you.